Hello, friends, and welcome back to Raising Daniels, Healing Parents, Building Courage, Leaving Legacy. Today, I want to talk about something that the Lord has been showing me lately. Before we begin, I want to remind you that this podcast is for educational and faith-based encouragement purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health support, therapy, or medical advice. What if one of the biggest reasons we struggle with anxiety, fear, and inner turmoil isn't because life is hard, but because we're trying to control things that were never ours to control? Now, before you click away, hear me. This is not about guilt. This is not about blaming ourselves for feeling anxious. Fear is a normal human emotion. Even the heroes of the Bible experienced fear. David experienced fear. Moses experienced fear. Elijah experienced fear. The disciples experienced fear. The question isn't whether we will feel fear. The question is, what do we do when fear arrives? Do we run to God? Or do we try to become God? And that's what we're going to unpack today. I think many of us, as Christian parents, carry an invisible burden. We think it's our job to protect our children from pain, to prevent every mistake, to stop every disappointment, to make sure they never struggle, to make sure they never fall away, to make sure they're okay. And before we know it, we've accepted responsibility for outcomes that belong to God. We start carrying weights He never asked us to carry. We begin managing situations that only He can manage. And the result? Exhaustion, anxiety, frustration, and a lack of peace. And quickly, before we continue, if today's episode encourages you, make sure you're connected to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you know another parent who could benefit from this message, please share it with them. Don't forget to check the description below for any new free resources, coaching programs, or courses if you want to do a deeper healing and nervous system work with me. All right, let's get back to the episode. I remember reading the story of Jesus calming the storm. The disciples were experienced fishermen. These weren't weak men. These were men who knew storms. Yet when the waves began crashing around them, panic took over. Listen to what they asked Jesus. In Mark 4, verse 38, it says, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" Isn't that often our question too? God, don't you care? Don't you see what's happening? Don't you see my child struggling? Don't you see my marriage struggling? Don't you see the uncertainty in the world? Don't you care? The disciples were looking at the storm. Jesus was resting. Not because the storm wasn't real, but because he knew his Father was still in control. One thing I've noticed in my own life is that anxiety often increases when my desire for certainty increases. I want answers. I want timelines. I want guarantees. I want to know exactly how everything will work out. But faith doesn't operate that way. Faith says, God, I don't know what happens next, but I know you. That's very different, because peace doesn't come from knowing about the future. Peace comes from knowing the one who holds the future. In Isaiah 26 verse 3 it says, you will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you. Notice what that verse does not say. It doesn't say God gives perfect peace to people whose circumstances are perfect. It doesn't say he gives peace to people who have all the answers. It doesn't say he gives peace to people who can control every outcome. It says he gives peace to those who trust in him. Peace is connected to trust. I wonder how many of us are trying to achieve peace by controlling more. Maybe we're overthinking, researching, worrying, planning, checking, monitoring, trying to solve tomorrow's problems today. And all the while, God is saying, come to me, not because he wants us to stop being responsible, but because he wants us to stop carrying responsibilities that belong to him. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is this. Control feels like safety, but it's actually a counterfeit peace. Because no matter how much we try to control, we can never control enough. There's always another what if, another fear, another possibility, another uncertainty. The cycle never ends. That's why true peace can only come from surrender. Not surrendering because we give up. Surrendering because we trust God. In Proverbs 3 verse 5 and 6 it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. Notice it doesn't say trust in the Lord when you understand everything. It says do not depend on your own understanding. That's challenging because our flesh wants understanding before trust. God often asks us to trust before understanding. And that's where faith grows. As parents, this can be especially difficult. We want to know our children will be okay. We want to know they will make wise choices. We want to know they will follow Jesus. We want to know they will overcome anxiety. We want to know they will walk the narrow path. But none of us can guarantee those outcomes. What we can do is pray. We can teach. We can model faith. We can point them to Jesus. And then we must trust God with what only God can do. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And I think one of the enemy's greatest lies is convincing Christian parents that everything depends on them. If everything depends on you, you'll live under constant pressure. If everything depends on you, you'll never rest. If everything depends on you, you will always feel behind. But the truth is, God never asked you to be your child's savior. Jesus already has that job. You are called to be faithful. Jesus is responsible for the results. That's incredibly freeing. Matthew 11 verse 28 to 30 says, "Then Jesus said, 'Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest.'" Notice that Jesus doesn't say, "Come to me when you've figured everything out." He says, "Come to me when you are weary." Maybe today you're carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. Maybe you're carrying your child's future. Maybe you're carrying fears about finance. Maybe you're carrying worries about your health. Maybe you're carrying concerns about the state of the world. And Jesus is gently asking, will you give those burdens to me? Here's something powerful to think about. The disciples did not experience peace because the storm disappeared. They experienced peace because Jesus was in the boat. The presence of the storm did not determine their peace. The presence of Jesus did. And the same is true for us. Your peace does not have to wait until the diagnosis changes. Your peace does not have to wait until your child changes. Your peace does not have to wait until your circumstances improve. You can experience God's peace right in the middle of the storm. Not because the storm isn't real, but because God is bigger than the storm. I want to challenge you to do something simple. Take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle. On the one side, write, "Things I can control." On the other side, write, "Things only God can control." Then spend 5 minutes honestly filling it out. You might be surprised how many things you've been carrying that belong on God's side of the paper. Once you've finished, pray the simple prayer. Lord, help me be faithful with what you've given me to do, and help me release what belongs to you. That's it. Simple, practical, powerful. I love hearing from you. And today's question is just one word. What's one thing you need to surrender to God today? One word. It could be fear, future, child, health, marriage, finances, control. Just one word. Put it in the comments below. Next week, in part 2 of this little series, we're going to talk about how to trust God when you don't know what's going to happen. Because surrender sounds good in theory, but what do we do when the future feels uncertain? How do we trust God when our prayers seem unanswered? How do we walk by faith when we can't see the path ahead? We'll unpack this together next time. Until then, remember, you don't have to carry what God never asked you to carry. You don't have to control what God has already placed His hands on. And you don't have to have all the answers to experience His peace. Thank you for spending time with me today on Raising Daniels, Healing Parents, Building Courage, Leaving Legacy. If today's episode encouraged you, follow the podcast, share it with a friend, join our Raising Daniels community through the link in the show notes below. Together, we're healing parents, building courage, and leaving a legacy of faith for the next generation.